So, but I'm trying also in this second talk to trying to relate my approach to the body, limits and boundaries within the framework proposed by Guy Debord, another French philosopher, whose book La Société du Spectacle is a new way, very interesting, to understand the semiotic of the body in a much bigger frame than the usual everyday life. So I quote Debord, who says that the spectacle is not a collection of images, but a social relationship between people mediated by the images. I think it is important, end of quote, to see as the image as a social relationship and not just a collection of images. A second quote from Debord says, I quote, "The spectacle should not be understood like a deception of a visual world, product of diffusion technique of message images. It's more about a Weltanschauung, a vision of the world that has become effective, which has been translated into material term. It is a vision of the world, of the objectified world." So, this two quote, I would like also to refer to the concept of semiosphere, within which I have developed the concept of corposphere. As everybody knows, Lotman defines the semiosphere as a semiotic continuum completely occupied by semiotic formation of various types and found in different levels of organization. We call that continuum semiosphere, said Yuri Lotman. But also he adds that the, I quote again, "the semiosphere is traversed by internal borders that specialize the sector of it from the semiotic point of view." So having this frame established by these authors, I would like to begin to introduce the subject of today, saying the following things. The body is one of the fundamental imaginaries, omnipresent in a world that is undergoing an accelerated process of general globalization, a process that almost does not miss any aspect of life, and that, among other areas, affect the technological, economic, legal, political, ecological, and cultural way of life. For semiotics, the study of the body, understood as a powerful communicational object, endowed with multiple, rich, and varied meanings, acquires a particular interest, since it is not only an object of multiple semiosis, but, moreover, it is actively linked to significational system that would be difficult to understand without permanent reference to the body itself. Among them, just to name a few, fashion, dance, furniture, etc. Given the enormous importance of the body as a semiotic system, we have proposed the constitution of a discipline that, following Lotman, we call corposphere, a discipline that will be part of the semiosphere and that will have as its purpose the study of human body as a system of meaning, the elaboration of a map of the elements that compose it, and of the codes developed by the corporal morphology, as well as the presence of the body in the semiotic organization of other systems of signification. The limits that different conceptions, religious, philosophical, scientific, have imposed on the body are varied and diverse. Such limits derive from the vision of the body and the corporeality that such system of thought have created. In the ancient Jewish tradition, for example, there is no opposition between the soul and the body, and it is in the latter, thanks to the circumcision, for example, that, I quote, God traces in his own flesh the mark of his alliance with us. End of quote. However, in Jewish tradition, the body is always in tension between purity and impurity, between sacred and profane. So it is always necessary, for example, to wash the hands and recite prayers according to the activities to be fulfilled, and even the dead body must be washed before burial. So the body is always at risk of losing its purity, a condition it must be kept because, according to the Genesis, it is made in the image and likeness of God. In the Christian tradition, I quote, compared to the subtlety of the spirit, which move without restrictions, the body is often felt as a weight. End of quote. A conception of the body that in particular Christian asceticism was commissioned to promote and disseminate. Numerous Christian authors, especially St. Augustine, insisted on the idea of the body as a burden for the soul, as a place of sin and perdition. There were therefore very marked limits between the soul considered spiritual, good and divine, and the body considered material, bad, earthly. Jesus himself in John 6:63 affirmed that, quote, it is the spirit who gives life. The flesh is worthless, end of quote, which served as the basis for the repulsion of the body that characterized Christian doctrine for centuries. However, St. Paul had another vision because he reminded believers that bodies, I quote, are members of Christ, temple of the Holy Spirit. In the Muslim tradition, the human body is a divine creation, and one of its main dimensions has to do with modesty. Quote, the body created by God requires modesty, especially in sexual areas. This modesty is linked to shame and social interdiction according to an invariable but rigorous code. End of quote. Muhammad himself affirmed that, I quote, shame and faith are two inseparable things. End of quote. But this corporal modesty is applied with greater force to women. Quote, the Quran, and tell believing women to look down at the ground as a sign of modesty, that they be chaste and show only the adornment of their outer garments, that they wrap the neckline with the veil so that her two breasts are covered by it. Along with the strict rules on modesty are, as a direct consequence, those related to controlled virginity, which required, even in many cases today, the fulfillment of the deflowering ritual that forced the husband to show the guest the resulting blood, a symbol of honor that will serve to confirm offsprings and paternity, and dignity and decorum of the bride's family. But while the blood of defloration is a symbol of honor, menstrual blood, on the other hand, is a symbol of impurity. I quote the Quran, it is evil. Keep yourself away from women during menstruation. Do not approach them until they have purified themselves. End of quote. Likewise, the body should not eat forbidden foods like pork, meat from dead or associated animals, etc. As in other religions, in Islam the body is a fundamental component of many rites. I quote, "After the prescribed purifying ablutions, the believer can begin to pray with his whole body." End of quote. Even the 5 bodily postures in Islam are indicated in which the rite of prayer done on a small carpet is articulated. Unlike other religions, in Islam the body is subject to severe punishment that are derived, above all, from the commission of faults related to modesty and sexuality. For this reason, for example, 100 lashes are established for the fornicator, and even death by stoning, and the same for, quote, "whoever changes religion, abandoning Islam." End of. Thus, according to these important religious traditions, the first frontier of the body is the spirit, or in other philosophical systems, it is the mind, the soul, or the consciousness. Of them, the body is differentiated by microsystem of meaning of a long tradition. If body is different, is contrary to the spirit in the way that body is material, spirit is immaterial, body is impure, spirit is pure, body is corruptible, spirit is incorruptible, body is transient, spirit is eternal, body is profane, spirit is sacred. But in the Society of the Spectacle, from Guy Debord, where the old semiotic systems of religious and philosophical origin have been weakened or lost of validity, new mythologies have created new frontiers that are expressed in the ritualities of the body, such as beauty pageants, fashion shows, advertising, film, or television. And these new corporal rituals, 4 fundamental imaginaries predominate, closely linked one to each other. Those imaginaries are beauty, health, longevity, and nutrition. Never, like in the last 30 or 40 years, have we known a media volume and intensity as those related to these 4 imaginaries that, in the new mythology of the media, constitute the proper definition of happiness. A happiness that is no longer deferred to the eternal or celestial life that religions offer for after death, but it is offered and claimed in the here and now. In the Society of the Spectacle, we observe, on the one hand, the visual as the own dominant semiotic mode of the being of contemporary culture, and on the other hand, in accordance with that mode, we also observe the reification of the body. 2 phenomena that characterize its overexposure, not only in the mass media, but even in everyday life. Let's talk about the first imaginary, aesthetic images, beauty technologies. The aesthetic imaginaries mark almost all the history of the human species and not only modernity. From the Homo sapiens, human beings have always made efforts to beautify not only their body, but also their spaces, utensils, and clothes. It is surprising to see that the Homo sapiens, even in the midst of the most terrible limitations and needs, finds time and dedicates efforts to beautify itself and its environment. The aesthetic drive seems innate to the human being. But what has happened in the last century is that the aesthetic imaginary has been taken to extremes never seen before and has become a quasi-religion. The corporal beauty has come to replace what was previously considered the true beauty, that is the spiritual one. Thus, true beauty is no longer the spiritual one and does not lie in the interior, but in the corporal exteriority. It is no longer just the old scheme according to which beauty was expressed on the left side of the following model: tall, short, thin, fat, white, black, beautiful, ugly. But now, a whole technology of beauty intervenes, turn into a powerful planetary industry where the last expression seems to be bleaching, in particular, anal bleaching. Second, I would like to talk about the imaginaries of health, the second imaginary I was talking about. Associated with the technologies of beauty are health technologies that operate not only in the boundaries between health and disease, but the first, health, is part today of the definition of beauty. It is not only about preventing diseases, but about the recurring image promoted by the transnational pharmaceutical industry of the need to be healthy, to feel good, but also in a well of reification of the body, just to be, way of being. For Díaz Rojo and Marco Moran, I quote, "The health cult reflects an individualist ideology. It makes the individual responsible for his or her health. It makes us believe that it only depends on lifestyle, individual behavior, personal eating habits, and forgets social and political factors, such as the health system, working conditions, and the environment. In the new social representations, the natural search for bodily health is another discursive strategy among the advertising maneuvers for the achievement of beauty and the search for eternal youth. These discursive strategies, verbal, but above all visual, show a conception of the body as individual patrimony and social spectacle. Number 3, imaginaries. Age imaginaries, the promise of longevity. In the promise of longevity intervenes, on the one hand, health, nutrition, physical exercise, pharmacological prevention, but above all, that promise is based on the exaltation of the opposite, youth, and, as a corollary, in the cursed idea of immortality that so many myths, legends, and stories have generated in the past. The novelty is that these imaginaries, fed today by medical technology that manipulates genes to provoke conception of super healthy babies. Hence, some rich cryogenize their body to die in the hope of being revived once there is the technology that would make them immortal. The fourth imaginary is the nutrition one. Nutrition imaginaries are closely associated with their imaginary neighbors, longevity, youth, health, but also with beauty. In this way, foods are not instruments of nutrition or gustatory pleasure, but are also factors of beauty, not only because of their ingestion, but also because of their presentation and the consumption rites that accompanies them. Along with the forementioned imaginaries, it is possible to mention another one that permeates all of them, the technological imaginaries. We live in a society that has replaced faith in the absolute, in God, in the hereafter, in eternal life, by the new God of technology, thanks to which in the near future we will eat well, we will be healthy, we will be young forever, and above all, we will all be beautiful. Thus, as others have already said, the technological reason and the faith in technology will replace, to a large extent, the divine reason and the faith in the gods. Let's talk about the morphological borders, skin and body architecture. Skin is one of the particular borders of the body. It is not only in the physiological sense, it captures sensations and temperatures. It has a particular texture, but above all, the skin is the limit between the body and the outside world. It is also the limit between the outer body and the inner body, between inside and outside. The classic morphological division of the body, head, trunk, limbs, etc., reveal at the same time a semiotic taxonomy. Head equals intelligence, trunk equals strength, limbs equals movement, etc. In this architecture of the body, there is also a conception of corporeity self in which, once again, there is a shift from the morpho-biological to the semiotic. The body is not only functional and harmonious, but also, as Merleau-Ponty said, a set of lived meanings. The skin has been transformed, as it is public and notorious, in the setting of other signs, like scarifications, tattoos, colors, makeup, but also the skin in itself and by itself is a complex science that defines a body imagery. It is no longer limited as nakedness, but as an erogenous zone, a sensual means of contact and exchange, as Baudrillard said. Thus, in the visual discursivity of the show, the skin becomes texture, color, temperature, smell, hardness and resistance, elasticity, firmness, smoothness, softness, defining characteristic of a body image in whose syntax the face is especially relevant, as well as the hand. Let's talk now about social borders, public and private, and their relationship to the body. The firm frontiers that used to separate the public and private planes began to weaken, as you know, progressively from a degradation of their limits between movie stars and officials, and particularly between political leaders. The semiotic characterization that separated the private life of political leaders, their family, their children, their love relationships, and his public life, the dense and protected boundary between the family and personal micro-universe and the macro-universe of the party, the public position and official functions does not exist anymore. Some of the most famous political scandals prove an almost complete dissolution of the limits between what is considered proper to the sphere of the private and what is considered proper to the sphere of the public. Naturally, although those borders were not always absolutely clear, there is no doubt that they have become blurred, and today it is considered almost a right of the media and the public to know what happens inside their political leaders' private life. But in that process of progressive erosion that the media developed, they also affected the representation and perception of the body, the limits between the hidden and the visible, between covering and uncovering. Although the exhibition of the naked body was frequent in pornography and in painting, its progressive process of unveiling passed new limits with, for example, the photography of motherhood, a condition of traditional hard moral and artistic limits, whose exhibition, however, it is now an increasingly common practice among young mothers. Like the following example. Maternity and eroticism, terms of an improbable equation until recently, seem to be reconciled in the new bodily imaginaries where even the traditional concepts of feminine beauty undergo unexpected transformation. Media frontiers, privacy and show. Omnipresent, with greater or lesser force, the mass media, and in particular the new technologies, have been the protagonists of this continuous and very systematic brace between the sphere of public and private. Some ruptures that mark an almost morbid, sickly interest and that have transformed intimacy into a spectacle. It is about what Sibylla calls, I quote, an increasingly strident show, the show of the self. End of quote. But she adds, I quote, there is a shift towards intimacy, a growing curiosity about those areas of existence that used to be unequivocally labeled as private. As the limits of what can be said and displayed are broadened, the sphere of intimacy is exacerbated in the light of visibility. In this way, the photographic intimacy of the family album has been moved quickly to the photologs on the web. And from the intimate and personal, secret and protected diary to the open blog Urbi et Orbe. From the letter to the email, and in the case of television, from fiction to reality shows. All of these examples have in common a rupture between the public and the private, between the intimate and the spectacle. Of course, all these changes of almost planetary dimensions are cause and consequence of the accelerated globalization in its different expressions: political, cultural, technological, financial, media, legal, etc. In other borders, for example, I will talk briefly about the semiotic gender borders. In one generation, my generation, for example, we have seen many semiotic gender changes. In fashion, for example, we went from skirt, in the case of women, from skirt to pants. In the chromatic code, we went from the masculine colors, traditional masculine colors, blue, black, brown, to the feminine colors, like pink, lilac, green, etc. In the ornamental code, for example, we went from the female earrings to male earrings. I still remember when I was studying in Paris, the first time I saw young men using earrings. And I thought at that moment that they were maybe gay young men, but no, it was the beginning of the using of, I'm talking about 1977, when I was studying at the college à l'École de Hautes Études en Sciences Sociales à Paris, studying semiotics. And this experience shows that in my own generation, these changes have been transforming progressively, like the way we present ourselves and present our body to the public. in the public space, and not only on the intimacy of our house or our room. But also sexual border has been transformed during this generation. From this marked division, masculine and feminine, male and female, we have new borders in gender identification, like gays, lesbian, transsexual, etc. And this vertiginous process of social and cultural transformations, in which there is a new conception of the body and a new definition of corporeity, it is possible to identify at least two semiotic regimes. The first one is a regime of symbolic consumption, in which objects, actors, actions, times, and spaces are transformed into symbolic merchandise. A second one is a scopic regime, the erotic drive from seeing, looking, to being seen, to being looked. The first one, a regime of symbolic consumption, here what is at issue is not only the consumption of objects destined to satisfy material needs, but of semiotic consumption, that is, of meanings. We consume meanings, not only objects. As Naomi Klein said, we do not consume products, we consume signs. But symbolic consumptions, whose most obvious example is the brand, is beyond the satisfaction of needs and, on the contrary, it is an expression of status, fashion, present, and finally existence. It is through the consumption of signs that we define our existence in the society of spectacle. It is not only to have for to be, but also, as the board says, to appear to be. The second one is scopic regime. I have a quote from a work that I did with some colleague. The quote says, "The glances on the object are not only a search for impressions obtained from the outside world and transformed into information for the observer. The glances are also the product of a scopophilic drive, an instinct or compulsive movement toward joyful, pleasurable, and rewarding contemplation, which Freud related with sexual pleasure. This bodily scopophilic drive can be of two types: exhibitionism, voyeurism." I want to I have no time to explain that, but I think those are two well-known concepts. Let's talk about looks and show. About the taboo body. As you know, history has shown us over the centuries a persistent concealment of the body, both to the gaze of the other, thanks to the dress, as well as to the look itself, thanks to the mirror. In effect, dominant religions have historically insisted on the need to cover the body almost completely, but they have also considered the contemplation of the body that led to narcissism to be sinful. The body was therefore a taboo object for both looks and touch and contact, which established rigid spatial codes that delimited how close to a body one might be, particularly if it was of the opposite sex. In the last century, not coincidentally the century of mass media, we have witnessed progressive unveiling of the body, and at the same time, the semiotic construction of a new corporeity. This new corporate is today tied to a regime of visibility, and even more to hypervisibility. The body is taken care of, modeled, semiotically constructed to be presented, and particularly to be seen. If we observe the evolution of fashion, we will observe, among other things, a progressive reduction in the extension of dresses that goes parallel to a progressive exposure of parts of the body that were previously hidden in a rigid manner. The society of the spectacle is, in good part, the accelerated transit of the taboo, sacred, sub-exposed body to the secular, profane, overexposed body, from the dense body to the transparent body. Here is a scheme where I try to relate, to establish relationship between interiority and exteriority of the body. Interiority characterized by being private, but belonging to the face, to reflect, to think, to an opaque body. And we have exteriority as public, as a mask, as a look watch, as a transparent body. This opaque body corresponds to the intimacy characterized by the use of linguistic sign, to the nudity, the recognition, the intimate diary, while the transparent body is related to the spectacle characterized today by image, fashion, body technologies, blog. And I try finally to relate these two realms, intimacy and spectacle. Intimacy has to be as a process that goes from to be, to appear, and to seem, which is related to what the board says about the society of the spectacle. So my conclusion here is, where are the limits of these boundaries? I think it would be useful to refer the sketches that we have presented to a more general context that goes beyond the body itself, of the corporeality built in a globalized world that, like so many other things, has reified the body, has turned it into our currency change, in our main symbolic capital, as Bourdieu said. Since, as Baudrillard also said, on gère son corps, on l'aménage comme un patrimoine. It means that our body has become our symbolic capital, in the sense that it is a capital that we use to communicate, to present ourselves in everyday life, in our private and public life. But in the context of globalization, it is necessary to reposition the board's sharp vision of social life, globalized economy, and the condition of the spectacle. I quote the board. The first phase of the domination of the economy over social life led to an evident degradation of being in regard to all human valuation. The current phase of total occupation of social life by the accumulated results of the economy leads to a generalized displacement of having to apparenting. So, according to the board, this absolute domination of the economy over social life has changed, has displaced the having to the apparenting, and that's why the image intervenes as a social relationship and not just as a set of images. Today we could not understand, or at least we will not fully understand, those transformations I have been talking about, those ruptures and border rearrangements of contemporary cultures without reflecting deeply on the presence of the body in its semantics, syntactic, and pragmatic dimension in such processes. But also conversely, we would not understand the semiotic potentialities of the body and the new corporeties if we do not reflect on the new cultural models, the media, and the new class of users that they build, that they form, that they educate. The body is a sign of symbolic density that, whether we like it or not, permeates all the significant practices of human beings. From them they come out, and to them they return. In a continuous flow, the articulation of senses that, without ceasing, human beings create in their lived world. However, it is important to note that the semiotic borders that we have reviewed here are not walls. They are, on the contrary, mobile marks, subjected to the endless flow of the forces of the new science, of the new myth and rights that are debated in the arena of the social and cultural forces that arise from the rich, varied, and complex processes of daily life, and also from the contents conveyed by the mass media. In any case, for semiotics, as for other disciplines, the systematic study of the processes that originate, articulate, and develop from the body imply a long-term commitment. It is about knowing that questioning, analyzing, and interpreting our cultures will be an unachievable purpose if we do not investigate in a rigorous and systematic way the meaning-making processes of the body. Thanks a lot.